All right, this video is about the procedures that you will be using in your quantitative dissertation methodology, and we're just going to go over a few tips and tricks. So the procedures basically means, how was your data collected? This section should be instructions for any other researcher to basically repeat your entire study, 5 years, 10 years from now. So that's what we're going to try to get through here. First thing is, how did you make your survey? Which program did you use and how did you distribute it? The main thing we use here at Alliant is Qualtrics. You get a free account, but there's a lot of other good ones. SurveyMonkey, I believe that's still around. Google has one. There's a new one called Cloud Research. There's MTurk. There's a bunch of them, but they all basically do the same thing. You can build a survey and distribute it through their services. This is important. We have a couple of gifted students here, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Katz. They created this video on basically how to make sure your survey is being answered properly, where people are paying attention and answering the questions honestly. The link will be down underneath the picture here. I'll put it in here. Plus, I'm going to talk about it more than once because they did a great job here, right? So, and Dr. Katz used to be one of our tutors, and Dr. Thompson used to hang out in our tutoring center. So they're both brilliant. I know they are. Okay, moving on. Are you using archival data? In other words, are you using old data somewhere, which is quite common. So what you got to talk about that is how were you able to access it? In other words, most places just don't put their data online for anybody to look at, right? So you usually have to ask somebody about it or something like that. And very important, were there any permissions that you had to get? So if there were permissions, you're supposed to put those letters of permissions or forms in an appendix somewhere. Any historical or legal documents that you needed? Right? Are those the source of your data? And you're supposed to tell us if the source was reputable. If it's from the government, yeah, you could call that reputable. Or from big companies, something like that. Again, you're supposed to show, is it a reliable source? And why is this a good resource for you? Now, if you're collecting your own data, there's a different set of rules here. How are you making sure that your survey takers are answering the questions, again, honestly, and they're paying attention? Did you use more than one type of integrity checks? And integrity checks is something like, what's the third day of the work week, right? And that would be Wednesday. So if they're not paying attention, they just tend to click through it. We get a lot of problem with bots these days. So make sure you put more than one type of integrity check. Another good one is, what color is the sky, right? So just real basic stuff. And again, watch this video if you haven't already, right? The Thompson and Katz. And I believe Dr. Dallenberg was also in on this, but we'll leave that up to them. But it has a lot of good tips and tricks on how to make sure that the validity of your survey will stay intact. All right, moving on. Next slide. So back to collecting your own data. What procedures did you use to recruit your survey takers? In the old days, people would use flyers. They'd tape them up all over the place in the library, in the tutoring center. They would have a link address for you to go to. But these days, a lot of people use the social media like Facebook, something like that. They try to get a big audience. And it really depends on who you want to take your survey. Example, if you're strictly looking for military people, you would tend to try to find military sites where you could advertise your survey. Or let's say you're looking at female college students, you would try to focus in on those sites where you could get female college students to take your survey, that kind of thing. So again, how did you recruit for your survey? Does your survey have a little section or a page that explains the protection of human subjects? Now, the IRB will get on you if you don't have one under, so just make sure you have something like that in your survey, right? It's a legal thing. And describe what your participants are going to go through, right? So in other words, what can they expect to take this survey, right? They're going to answer a lot of questions, right? That goes without saying. But on your survey from Alliant, you should have an informed consent form and It doesn't hurt to tell your survey takers what you will be measuring. In other words, what are your variables? There's always demographics, but you might be measuring, who knows, depression, job satisfaction, relationship satisfaction, that kind of stuff. And you might want to tell them how it's going to be used if you want to. And were there any interviews involved? Sometimes there are, sometimes there's not. Any debriefings after the survey? That's kind of rare these days, but if you are, make sure you let your readers know about it. This one's right here is a big one. Did you pay for people to take your survey? That's becoming a lot more popular these days. Some professors are okay with it, some are not, so you make sure that your committee members are okay with it, okay? So I have worked with students that have paid Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, etc., to find them the minimum sample size needed. And sometimes your target audience can be a little bit difficult to find. I did work with a nice young man a couple years ago, and he was looking to survey people that had been in the military who had a serious wound. And by that, he meant they had lost a limb or an eye. And he couldn't find anybody. So what he ended up doing was going out in front of the VA hospital, and anybody that walked by with a fake limb, he would try to get them to take a survey. So again, it's totally up to you guys on how you get this stuff done. But you just got to tell the reader if you paid them to take your survey. You're supposed to let your board members know if any compensation was offered to your participants. Like, did you hold a raffle? Very common, right? So if you do, you have to describe how the winners will be chosen and contacted. Now, you're going to say that winners will be chosen at random, but you have to describe what you mean by random. In other words, how did you come around with this random thing? Did you put all their names in a big jar on a separate piece of paper and blindfold your next door neighbor and have them pull one out? That's random. Or use a random number generator in Excel. That's what we do down here all the time. And then how would you contact them? Usually you leave a little question that says, if you're interested in the raffle, please leave your email address here and you will be contacted if you won, something like that. But I think we're getting down to the end of this show. And yeah, there's the end slide. So that's it, and I hope it helps. MGZ out.